We have more for your ears only. I'm David Alpern.
And I'm Eddie Robinson with this quote from the news. More divisions, more escalation, and confrontations. That was what one protest leader in Yemen predicted after the surprise return of President Ali Abdul Salah following months of medical treatment in Saudi Arabia following an assassination attempt. Salah called for a truce and a ceasefire, though such an agreement had already broken down just days earlier. Now this.
People come up with ideas, concrete ideas, and then we figure out how to fund them. We have 1,400 commitments that have been made by several thousand people, often working together over 4 years, worth $46 billion that have already improved the lives of 200 million people in 150 countries.
Former President Bill Clinton on his annual Clinton Global Initiative Summit in New York last week, at which creating jobs was a major focus for the army of corporate, nonprofit, and philanthropic leaders in attendance. Among them was Michael Elliott, president and CEO of the grassroots advocacy and campaign group One, founded in part by the rock star Bono. At the CGI session, One pledged a multi-year campaign focused on famine in Somalia and a wider humanitarian crisis in the Horn of Africa. It's called Drought is Inevitable, Famine is Not.
Elliott is a former journalist at TIME, Newsweek, and The Economist. Before that, a government policy staffer and college professor. And to talk about One, its new African campaign, and this year's Clinton sessions, for your ears only, Michael Elliott joins us now. Welcome back to our program.
Good to be here, quite like old times.
First, tell us why One chose to focus on Somalia and the Horn of Africa. How bad are things there?
Really, really bad. We have a major humanitarian crisis on our hands, which perhaps for understandable reasons, there's lots going on in the world. It's not getting the media attention that it should be getting. You're looking at the worst drought for 60 years in the Horn of Africa. But what we and other non-governmental organizations, international organizations have been hammering is that while drought's inevitable, a drought is an act of nature. Famine is not. Famine is an act of man. We know how to stop people from dying of starvation in drought conditions, and we have just not done it. The UN, I'm talking to you now at a UN mini-summit on the Horn of Africa that's going on this Saturday. The UN is $1 billion short of what's needed for emergency relief in the Horn. And more particularly, the international community has not come good on its promises in terms of investing in agriculture in the developing world to increase agricultural productivity, which is the only true solution long term to make sure that we don't repeat these awful scenes that we've seen in the last couple of months.
One does not deliver actual aid or services. How does it plan to help in a situation like Somalia?
Our job is advocacy. Our key role is to kind of hold people's feet to the fire and to make sure that in particular rich governments, rich world governments, multilateral organizations keep their promises. They deliver what it is that they have said to do. We do this by means of terrific policy work, by means of absolutely superb lobbying of influentials around the world, all backed by a membership base of more than 2.5 million. So our niche is to be the advocates for making sure that what's promised to the poor world and to the developing world in terms of smart, effective aid is actually delivered.
What about the problem of violence from Islamist terror groups and lessons on limits to the use of force in Somalia that Washington and other governments drew from the Black Hawk Down debacle there?
Well, I mean, obviously, Somalia is one of the most troubled parts of the world. The Horn of Africa is one of the most troubled parts of the world. You've had 20 years of on and off violence. David, our former employer, the very first cover story I first wrote for Newsweek was on Somalia. That was 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. So there you go. But that said, I think it needs to be understood by people who just kind of throw up their hands and say nothing can be done, that aid is getting into Somalia. Aid is getting into Mogadishu. It is being distributed. There are surely challenges in the south-central part of Somalia. Everyone understands that. But there are corridors being established, both from the south and from the east. Aid is getting into Mogadishu. So people should not assume that nothing can be done in these circumstances. In some cases, arrangements are being made on the ground, I understand, for aid to get through. So it's a little bit of a counsel of despair to kind of throw up your hands and say, well, remember Black Hawk Down. this is a situation, this is a place in which no good can be done. That's absolutely not the case. And if you talk to people who are working on the ground, they'll tell you that very loud and clear.
Michael, what are some other problem areas in which your one team has been involved?
Well, actually, one of the key things that we're doing right now, and we launched a major campaign on this week at the CGI, is to move from the short-term focus of the need for emergency relief in the Horn of Africa to a longer-term campaign on investment in agriculture more generally. 2 years ago at the L'Aquila conference in Italy, the G8 countries pledged $22 billion to invest in developing world agriculture. They've delivered on only a little more than a fifth of that at best, with 1 year of their commitments to go. So this is a classic case where our job is to hold governments to account for what they promised. So over the next few weeks, as we roll out our campaign, we'll be engaging with our 2.5 million members. You'll see some edgy and provocative and I think interesting PSAs and other campaigning devices. So agriculture, investment in agriculture as a long-term solution to these short-term crises that we're now seeing is very much a focus for us over the next few months.
Let me turn personal and ask what led you to leave journalism for philanthropic activism?
Well, David, I'd always thought that one day I might do something else. I was lucky enough to be approached by this absolutely fantastic organization. I'm sure they approached lots of other people too. But I knew about one. I knew the work that they had done over the years. I'd been a great admirer of what they'd done. And when the opportunity came to put down my pen and pick up something else, not quite sure what the something else is actually, I thought this was a fantastic chance, and so it is proving.
Former journalist Michael Elliott is president and CEO of the grassroots advocacy and campaign organization called One.
Quote from the news, "We mistook it as a peace message. That was only deception." That was Afghan President Hamid Karzai on the Taliban emissary who had delivered a CD indicating serious interest in peace. He was invited to the home of the country's leading peace broker, former President Burhanuddin Rabbani, whom he killed with a suicide bomb hidden in his turban.
Next, the Troy Davis execution and a growing debate on eyewitness testimony. For your ears only.